It's like whether you're a provider dealing with burnout, a caregiver who's dealing with vicarious traumatization, or a patient who's working with medical stress and trauma in some way, those themes come up. They come up in treatment. So, my hope is that anybody who interacts with medical systems in any kind of way can take something from this book.
Welcome to the Medical Trauma Support Podcast, the show where we shine a light on the hidden impacts of medical trauma, explore tools for healing, and empower you to take control of your health journey. I'm Sarah, your host, a passionate advocate for trauma-informed care, somatic healing, and compassionate conversations. I'll bring you expert insights, healing strategies, and personal stories of resilience to help you feel seen, heard, and supported on your path to recovery. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Medical Trauma Support Podcast. And I'm super excited because I have Kristen Mullane back. She was on the very first episode, and it was such a wonderful conversation. And actually, the most listened to of all the podcast episodes was our first one about medical stress and trauma. So welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Yes. And I'm super excited to say that what we're talking about today is Kristen's new book, and she will go into more of the details. But before we do that, I want to say congratulations, because this is huge. To write a book is huge. And also, I don't know, this book was amazing. I loved it. I got so much out of it. I felt like as I was reading it, I was like, I feel like I'm literally working with Kristen. Like there's so much content that you're teaching, but at the same time, like there was such like a gentle, connected way that it was written that I felt like I was with you. I felt like I was being supported by you. So I think this book is amazing. For people listening, you're in for a treat to get to learn more about the book. And there will be a link in the show notes to buy the book as well and to find out more information. But Kristen, welcome back.
Yeah,
And
thank you for the feedback. And
yeah.
yeah, that's really wonderful to hear that it sat with you that way.
Yes. And I'm curious if you could tell the listeners about your book. How do you sum your book up?
Yeah, this is always a challenge because it, like, as you say, there's a lot kind of in there. But really what the book attempts to do is to help people find a pathway to be with what's hard after adverse medical experiences have happened, whether we're patients or caregivers or providers. I know back when we talked before, we kind of touched on this idea of systemic trauma and how when we're working with systems that don't nuance to the level of individuals, it's hard, and so some of the areas that can take a little bit of damage or a lot of damage are our beliefs around safety and empowerment. And so this book really does attempt to address those things, like whether you're a provider dealing with burnout, a caregiver who's dealing with vicarious traumatization, or a patient who's working with medical stress and trauma in some way, those themes come up. They come up in treatment. So, my hope is that anybody who interacts with medical systems in any kind of way can take something from this book.
Yes. As I was reading it, I was thinking about that, and I was thinking that this book is for anybody who's a human, because we will all engage with the medical system at some point. And many of us engage with the medical system the moment that we come onto the earth, because the majority of people are born into the hospital, born at the hospital.
Right. Yeah.
So whether you have personally experienced medical trauma or not, I just think this book is so it's so educational, first of all, in understanding what that means, like understanding what medical stress and trauma mean, but then the parts where people can process their feelings and, because it is a workbook, are helpful for everybody, and especially for people who've experienced medical stress and trauma, but also for caregivers. If somebody you love is struggling with medical trauma, this book will just be like this guide to you to get a little taste of what they're experiencing.
Yeah, I'm hopeful for exactly that. I think part of what we talked about, my dream for healthcare, is that patients, providers, and caregivers can all experience a little bit of healing. And part of that
Mhm.
is perspective taking and being
Mhm.
able to understand what the experience of working with the body when the body is challenged
Mhm.
is like from all
Right.
these different facets. And like you're saying, we all have a body,
Mhm.
and the likelihood that that body is going to interact with the medical system over the course of its life is high.
Yes.
And when that happens, we carry our whole history with our bodies with us into that exam room, whether
Mhm.
we're the provider in that room, the caregiver, or the patient. Um,
Yes.
and so the hope is to, I wanted to make tools that feel both specific and general enough to capture a lot of the human experience.
Mhm.
So the specificity is around, yeah, we're going to look at skills that are needed to navigate healthcare as it is right
Mhm.
now in this
Yes.
historical moment. Not what we aspire to be, not what we have been in the past, but here and now, what we've got. And and to honor the fact that within that there are some themes that every human may come up against, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yes, the safety and empowerment piece I think is really beautiful and so important in this and in life in general.
Yeah. So it's true. And the two things are related, and they're both a tangle that we
Yes.
need to kind of work with our whole lives. Usually, like, this workbook is this beginning of a conversation, truly, like something that can be continued within ourselves for
Yes.
into perpetuity, Yeah.
Yes. And the thing that I think is interesting, and as I was reading it and going through it, I was thinking this could literally be like the book that someone takes this year in 2025 when we're recording and works through it because there is so much information and so many opportunities to take in the information, but then to slow down, process it, and process what it means to each person as an
Hmm.
individual.
Hmm.
And when I was reading it, I mean, I've been in my own healing journey for many years, many, many years, but I was able to still be impacted and still be able to dig a little bit deeper with your book. And I love that it could be somebody who is totally new to their healing journey, that they take it and this is their year to start the process, or somebody who is over 10 years into theirs who is also able to pick up this book. So I thought that was amazing. And that feels
Yeah.
kind of magical. I don't know how you did that.
I, it's interesting too, because as I was doing it, I sat down and did it too.
Hmm.
And there were things that I came out with that I was like,
Yes.
I hadn't thought about that. Because, just because we're asking questions as a provider doesn't mean we fully have answered them for ourselves. And there's a
Right.
lot of reflection questions included in the book. Um, and I really think no matter where we're at in our life, there's always something we can learn. There's always something we can learn. And, our path with that is as unique as a fingerprint, really. But
Yes.
I'm glad to hear you say that you could take something from it. And
Oh, yes.
yeah, and I think there's certainly different ways, and we can get to this too, but one of the things I really wanted to give people the hope with this book is to give them lots of options for how to engage with it. So
Hmm.
whether you take the year, like you're saying, to let the process gradually unfold, or
Hmm.
you work with a trusted healthcare provider if you have one to
Hmm.
gradually approach some of the different questions with support. I mean, or you try a couple things in here and you're like, I'm not ready. And then you come back
Right.
in like 6 months or a year. It's not going anywhere. It's here for you. And
Yes.
so people can, I think, the hope with any kind of workbook is to extend the boundaries of therapy a little bit.
Hmm.
It's hard to access that service sometimes, depending on where you
Yes.
are or where you're at with trust with providers and systems.
Right.
So this is something people can do independently with sufficient privacy around it. Um,
Right. And at their
yeah,
own time,
yeah,
on their own
exactly.
timeline. And one thing I was kind of just imagining as I was going through it was how beautiful would it be to have a little group, a little peer group
Hmm.
that you work through this book with. And so, you go off on your own and you do the work and then you come together and you can discuss what it brought up for you. Obviously, a peer group that you feel safe enough to do this work with. But
Right, right.
I just thought that could be a really beautiful way to get the support and also be in community with others. And like you said, therapy is not accessible for everyone for a variety
Right,
of reasons.
right.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, having this and a support system could be life-changing for somebody.
Yeah. I mean, I guess while we're here, I mean, hopefully providers can use this themselves, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
also, um, the formatting of the workbook, I have this is my little author copy thing, but
Mm-hmm.
um, the idea is that it's really easy to make reproducible handouts. It's,
Mm-hmm.
I I was thinking a lot about my experiences too in working in different healthcare systems and how fast-paced the work really is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so some of my background, for example, is in integrated care teams in primary care clinics where I might have
Mm-hmm.
had 20 to 30 minutes to meet with a patient. And that was in the
Mm-hmm.
context of them having a real long day, meeting with other providers a lot of the time.
Yes.
Um, and so, depending on your role, I think there's ways to flexibly approach this
Mm-hmm.
book.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on your level of readiness to engage with it with other people versus independently, like there's just
Mm-hmm.
lots of ways to bend the frame with it. But I could totally see where, yeah, just being able to copy out a safety plan for use in medical systems and give that to
Yes.
somebody for homework, right? Quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's a little bit more intervention than we have right now in most healthcare
Exactly.
interactions. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And you talked about the safety plan, and I wanted to
Mhm.
dive into that a little bit because I hope it's okay for me to share that one of your sections is all about safety.
Yeah.
And that is very meaningful for me because I think a lot about that. I think a lot about how can we as individuals feel a little bit safer each day in our own systems. And we know that medical stress and trauma can really impact a sense of safety that we maybe had before the event, or
Mhm.
some people, maybe have never been able to really feel a sense of safety because of early experiences. And so I think about safety a lot, and I would love for us to chat a little bit and for you to share with the listeners about some of the content you have around safety and why it's so important to you.
Do you want to do an experiential exercise? Should we do it
Sure.
right now?
Yes, yes, yes. For the listeners, this is awesome.
Yeah, let's do it. Well, I think, let's see. So, like you say, I agree. I think most healing starts with a bit of safety,
Mhm,
right? We
mhm,
need it internally inside ourselves so
mhm,
we can know that we're safe, whatever kind of thoughts or emotions come up.
mhm,
And we need it externally in our relationships, in our communities, in the world. And often after trauma, people will come away with a sense that safety has been completely shattered. And
mhm,
I'd like to offer another way of kind of thinking about it in this moment where, we think about safety more on a continuum
mhm.
and as something that we can gradually cultivate for ourselves,
Right.
right? It's not something that other people always are able to give us, right?
Mhm,
Often safety and privilege get conflated in our world as well. Like,
mhm.
people pay to feel safer when there might be some illusion there, especially when it comes to health and the body,
Right.
you know. So there's just a lot to unpack in terms of how we think about safety. And I'd like to offer listeners a chance to just begin to identify what safety means to you. And so this is an exercise from the book. So if people listening want to grab pen and paper, um, and just kind of,
I'm ready.
oh,
I've
you
got my
ready?
pen.
Awesome.
I'm ready.
Awesome. Um, the idea is to do some journaling.
Mhm,
And we can just take some breaths if the breath feels safe as we're opening this exercise. If the breath isn't quite safe in the body, that's okay too. Like, see if you can find just one way to ground, one sense that feels approachable to you. It might be something you can see, or the feeling of your pen in your hand. And we're going to take, let's say, about just 2 minutes. Does that feel good? To just
mhm.
journal a little bit, just to start to open this door. And I'll cue everybody when it's time to come back. But the idea is to take a moment to journal or draw or make a list about what safety means to you. And so as you complete this exercise, you might think about times and places when you have felt safe. You might think about different domains like physical, emotional, relational, financial, or spiritual safety. There might be sensory experiences or items that you have that evoke a sense of safety. So that could mean your collection of action figures from childhood or the smell of your grandmother's cooking. Right? So just kind of starting gradually to evoke those things. And maybe think about even how you felt in your body when you feel safe, or movement practices that you associate with safety. So I'm going to kind of tune out and just let people have some moments of silence here. Just right. Maybe folks can take about 30 more seconds to just wrap up a thought. Yeah, and so I can kind of share a little bit of what words get kind of used in this exercise, if that's helpful. If you want to share what came up for you, Sarah, I'd love to hear it, but I also know this may not be the forum for that. um, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit of what came up for me. And for me, I have in the past few years really been thinking a lot about places where I can show up authentically. And that's something that came up for me in this exercise is really that's where I feel safe when I can show up without the mask of being in the world and being able to just be my true self and be loved in that. And I'll share something, personally for me is I just had a birthday.
Happy
And
birthday.
thank you. And I invited people that I love from different parts of my life. And this year I really felt like these people I was with knew me. They like knew the real me.
Mhm.
And not that gifts are in any way necessary, but the many of my friends gave me these gifts that were so meaningful. And I thought they really see me and they see who I am. And it just felt like, wow, this journey I've been on to really find these authentic relationships is like feeling very tangible.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yes. So that was
Yeah.
part of my journey during this 2 minutes.
I mean, I love that it can take us on a journey and that
Hmm.
it sometimes this exercise uncovers places where we really have cultivated safety for ourselves. We've
Mm-hmm.
really done that work. And I love just kind of highlighting how important emotional safety is and the
Mm-hmm.
ability to be fully authentic without being judged, and those are things that do come up as a theme.
Mm-hmm.
Other things that I've certainly heard people talk about is how important financial security is for
Mm-hmm.
them. Words that kind of come up are like calm, relaxed, peaceful, sanctuary, like things like that
Yes.
definitely get evoked too. And then certainly relationships and people, um,
Mm-hmm.
key attachment figures that offered a sense of security in a world that feels confusing and overwhelming a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, like feeling accepted, feeling well resourced in our nervous systems, all of that goes into this idea. And I think it's really wonderful to hear you acknowledge yourself in this moment for
Mm-hmm.
having come to a place in space where you've put in the work
Mm-hmm.
to build relationships that offer you some of those things.
Yes,
It's
and
awesome.
it took many years to get to that point. I went because
Hmm.
I know I'm not the only person that really craved the really deep, authentic, safe relationships, but it also takes some time and energy and work. So thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So that's an example of one of the things that's in here just to get the gears turning a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are other things too, like really getting into the nitty-gritty of safety planning for a medical visit,
Mm-hmm.
for example. And that's an exercise that can happen on the caregiver side or on
Mm-hmm.
the patient side. And it may even be really relevant for providers too, after something has happened, right?
Yes,
To feel safe coming back into medical environments and starting to think about what they need to move in that direction of what safety means to them. So,
absolutely.
yeah, getting a sense of where we are on the map. Hmm.
I think oftentimes people forget that care providers or medical providers are also humans who
Hmm.
will also need care in the medical system at some point. And even as a medical provider, they may still experience medical trauma.
Hmm.
And then that's what I thought of as you were talking about a medical provider maybe needing this book as they step back into their job after a medical leave.
Oh, that's a beautiful example of a time and space where I hope this can be useful.
Mm-hmm.
I think too, even as we're just gosh, so just having worked in medical systems, there's so much bureaucracy there. There,
Mm-hmm.
there are things in places where it can activate our defenses and make
Mm-hmm.
us feel unsafe interpersonally. I'm thinking of providers who have to advocate for ongoing care for a patient to hospital admins who are saying this is too expensive or we need to discharge them before the
Mm-hmm.
provider feels ready, right? There are situations like that that I also think really tap at a person's feelings of safety and empowerment in these
Yes.
environments. Um, so on the provider side, lots of ways to kind of think about safety, and then of course, for for patients who've gone through something hard, to go back in, whew, and like breathe into a space of trusting another provider.
Mm-hmm.
That's so challenging. That's so hard.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I just really want to honor all the different places and spaces where this can get banged up over the course
Mm-hmm.
of life. I think too, like on the caregiver side, watching a person you love, like you mentioned, just move through something incredibly difficult, and being unable to keep them safe
Right.
from that event.
Right.
Like that's another place where some of our beliefs get really challenged. So, yeah, there's a whole section around safety and then a whole section around empowerment and power and control also
Mm-hmm.
because of things like that, like being sort of helpless in the face of illness and injury, and how, oh gosh, we don't sit with that well. I don't. I hate feeling
Right.
helpless. It's like one of the
Yes.
hard ones. It's one of the reasons I wrote
Yes.
the book. I was like,
Yes.
I can't sit on my hands. I don't enjoy this feeling.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to, help people find the ways where they have some choice, right? And
Right.
something they can do to help tackle the reality that they're facing.
Yeah, and I think something that we haven't even addressed about the book is the big emphasis on mindfulness. I
Yeah,
feel
that's
like
sort of like key skill.
right,
Yeah.
right, such an
Yeah.
important part of the book and the support around the book. And it's beautiful. And I think that you also, do you teach mindfulness?
Yeah, I am a certified meditation teacher. I got
Mm-hmm.
trained through the Lab of Meditation in Vancouver, Canada,
Mm-hmm.
which is a really trauma-informed program. And my teacher, her name's Hiro Demichelis, is just such a gentle, beautiful person in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was coming to this training, during the acute throes of the pandemic. So we were all
Mm-hmm.
online, and she would sit there and be like, I believe love can pierce the screen. And she would,
Mm-hmm.
kind of guide us through this whole process of learning how to guide people. I've also taken a whole lot from David Treleaven's work with trauma
Mm-hmm.
sensitive mindfulness. And without those two people, this book would not exist, truly. So a lot of what the book makes an attempt to do is to talk about some of the core principles of trauma sensitive mindfulness in
Mm-hmm.
this particular context of dealing with and working with and being with. I don't want to just say dealing with. That makes bodies
Mm-hmm.
sound like just a burden, right? But
Mm-hmm.
maybe we can be with them in a way that supports the fact that they've been through something hard. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I think we touched on this back when we talked before, but when it comes to mindfulness, the practice is very embodied for a
Yes.
reason. The body can't time travel the way the mind can. So it makes sense
Mm-hmm.
as an anchor point when it comes to trying to cultivate focus and attention and presence, where, our bodies are in the present. They really
Mm-hmm.
cannot, at this point in our technology, they can't go anywhere else. Um, and it may be the last place somebody wants to be after trauma,
Right.
right? Or a traumatic event may have negatively impacted part of the body that needs to be responsive to the meditation. Like one of the things
Mm-hmm.
I'm really aware of is how many of our meditations ask people to be with the breath, or they're going to guide you through the entire body. But what if someone has COPD, right?
Mm-hmm.
And does not feel safe with the breath?
Right.
Or if they are missing a limb,
Mm-hmm.
or if they have hearing loss or visual loss, or some of the other, like some people cannot swallow anymore
Mm-hmm.
after cancer treatment. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
ways in which our languaging in meditation doesn't fully, it's not all the way inclusive all
Right.
the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that's really so the last section of the book offers some different meditations, like there's one in here that does not include breath awareness.
Mm-hmm.
There are some in here that are designed for people who move with adaptive devices like wheelchairs,
Mm-hmm.
um, so that you can still engage in a movement focused meditation in a way that is hopefully languaged to include how your body moves through space.
Right.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
there's meditations for medical uncertainty, like some of the things that, that are unique to the experience of moving through healthcare
Mm-hmm.
environments.
Yeah, and that is to me like that's what being trauma informed is, like you said. And so I think for listeners who maybe tried to step into a mindfulness meditation and it was not a fit, to know that there are trauma informed options,
Mm-hmm.
and that makes all the difference oftentimes for an experience that feels safe and one that doesn't.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and I love, for people to know that in your book there are different options, and they can record themselves reading it,
Mm-hmm.
ask a loved one to read it. I believe that you have these recordings on your website.
Yeah, some of them are there. Hooray. And
It's
I'm going
so
to put up
exciting.
more. But yeah, for sure. Like I think it's interesting in doing this work. Like one of the things I'll usually ask people is like, okay, after we try something, what kept you in it and what took you out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like were there things that you noticed that just made it a little harder?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really unique to each person. Like it might
Yes.
be the sound of somebody's voice just doesn't sit with you well at
Mm-hmm.
first, or um, with some of the guided meditations that are available online, it might be that they're too long at first, or that
Mm-hmm.
They mention parts of the body that you don't feel comfortable having mentioned. Like there's
Mhm.
just a range of different responses that people can have. And, it's not to say that we can never, David Treleaven talks about this a lot. Like, it's not to say we can never widen our window of tolerance so that we can approach more of what's difficult. Like maybe at some point, that voice that bugged you when you first started your practice, you can be with that voice and say, there it is. It's kind of
Right.
bugging me, but I can be with it a little bit more. I'm a little more to- um, in homeostasis and balance still.
Yes.
I've widened what my central nervous system can do, like you and I've talked about
Mhm.
before.
Mhm.
But that might not be the place to start at first. At first, we're trying to develop a sense of safety and trust within ourselves,
Mhm.
with the practice, with the person guiding us in the practice. There's a lot going on there. And so it's really important, I think, to have well-trained people who are aware of that and who are willing to keep offering different options to help you
Mhm.
find your path to engage with the practice. And sometimes what that means is having really specific language
Mhm.
that really witnesses you right here, right now, right where you are.
Mhm.
Um, so this is an attempt to do that. I'm not going to say I 100% captured every lived experience.
Yeah,
For
that's kind
that,
of
we may,
impossible.
right?
Right.
But it's at least more tailored. That's
Yeah.
the hope.
And I think, and you do talk about this in your book as well, but also in our path to finding safety in ourselves and our own bodies is that we have to also be kind and loving and listen to ourselves. And so many of us may just be like, I'm just going to get through this meditation. I'm going to stick with it. Part of finding the safety, in my experience, is that we are listening to our own feedback. And if something
Yeah.
feels unsafe, we're stopping, we're acknowledging that, and we're moving on to something that feels better for us. So I
Hmm.
think that's a piece of the safety journey too. And knowing that there are other resources, you don't have to just like white knuckle through a meditation. I will do this, because that can actually be more harmful
Oh, yeah.
than just not doing it at all.
I agree. It doesn't work to harm ourselves into healing ourselves, right? So,
Right.
I mean, part of what I want to highlight too is that can also be an approach to the book itself. Like
Hmm.
any healing resource that's offered
Hmm.
is sort of stimulus in the world that we may have reactions to, right? And part of what healing means and looks like is recognizing that we can keep ourselves safe. The parts of
Hmm.
ourselves that have been hurt and wounded, you know, usually we develop some protection around those parts.
Hmm.
And for us to heal, some of those protections have to kind of soften back a little
Hmm.
bit, give us room to be with the wound. But in order for those protector parts, right, to kind of move a little bit aside, they need to know that we ourself in our whole self can handle it. And
Right.
part of what that means is like setting effective boundaries to kind of support the work. And so that's covered in here too, like a lot about boundary setting.
Hmm.
Um, and just kind of recognizing when you might need a boundary. And that
Hmm.
includes with the book itself, right? Like,
Right.
um, I think with medical trauma in particular, you're dealing with cells in the body, and it's going to take time for you to come back. We have to reattune to the body after
Hmm.
medical events happen. It takes time to learn what your body needs on the other side of that. There
Hmm.
may be cellular changes that make it more difficult to sustain attention. I'm thinking about stroke, for example, or other
Hmm.
neurological things that may make it really hard to read, right? Or to be with
Brain
the
fog,
exercises, right? Or to meditate.
chronic fatigue. Yes.
All of those things,
Yes.
right? So anything that you're working with medically could impact your experience of mindfulness, your
Hmm.
ability to stick with the practices, and to stick with the workbook. So
Hmm.
having lots of compassion for the body as it moves through, and for you as you're figuring out what it needs. Um, I mean, that's just so needed. And I guess I really want
Hmm.
to emphasize that as the book kind of comes out into the world. Like, there's not a right way and a wrong way to approach this book.
Hmm.
It's not something you have to sit down and do in order, every exercise perfectly right in order to achieve healing. That is not the spirit of the book. Really and truly, it's another way of learning yourself, of attuning to what you need. Yeah. So not every exercise will work for every person, and I think it's really important to listen to yourself around that.
Yes, that's so beautiful. So, thank you so much for being here and for creating this book, because I really think this book can help so many people. But before we go, I wanted to know if you wanted to share with the listeners anything else, like resources that you have, upcoming workshops.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So
Mm-hmm.
this book comes out on February 11th. Whew,
So exciting.
2025. So it'll be available on Amazon. We're trying to just guide everybody there
Mm-hmm.
for ease. Other things that are coming down the pike this year, I am so excited about. So at my practice, which is Ginkgo Leaf Health Services, we are in February starting another program. So we've talked about RISE before.
Mm-hmm.
This one is called Caregiver Grief for Moms.
Mm-hmm.
And it's specifically created for moms who are caregiving for medically complex kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so kids who are navigating the healthcare system and moms who are having to advocate for them in that space. And so, like many of our programs, this one is also mindfulness based and really trauma informed, and it's an attempt to bring people together in community who've had some similar things happen. So that's happening. That'll start on February 28th. And we'll be hopefully running future cohorts of that also. And the main lead for that is Teresa Ruggiero, one of the other clinicians in my practice, who has her own caregiving experience to draw from. So that's one thing happening. The other thing I think I'm just really excited about, we finally have a meditation coach in our practice.
Yay!
So exciting. So some of your listeners may be familiar with Matt Maxwell.
Oh, yay!
Yeah, so
Yes.
I know he kind of mentioned this in his interview too, because I was listening to y'all.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so he's available for people who might need a little extra support with their practice. And then the last thing I'll tell y'all about is in April of this year in Asheville, North Carolina, we're doing a trauma-informed cinema screening event called Healing Healthcare, Cultural and Ethical Considerations. It's a weekend event where we screen several films that attempt to honor the different perspectives that we've talked about today, patients, providers, caregivers. And the hope is that it draws the community together so we can have this common experience where we're all feeling witnessed. And then there are some really wonderful guest speakers who are coming to kind of help educate folks about medical trauma and about the different facets of it, including Dr. Sasha McBain, who is a key researcher in the field. So that's happening April 5th and 6th at the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute in Asheville, North Carolina. So yeah, really neat stuff happening over here. And I just so appreciate your podcast for being a vehicle to help build awareness around this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's been wonderful to do this podcast and get to hear people's stories and get to talk to people like you that are every day out there doing the work to spread awareness about medical stress and trauma, and to be, therapists, and support people for the millions of people that are struggling with medical trauma. So, and it all sounds amazing. I want all the listeners to know that there will be links in the show notes for all of the events that Kristen shared about. And they sound amazing. And because I know you and the kind of work you do, they're going to be amazing. So
Thanks.
Thank you. It was so good to see you. And thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Sarah.
You're welcome.